This is the model that got me interested in made in Japan Fenders. Welcome back, troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. On April 26th of 2019, I posted a video of a guitar that absolutely blew my mind, and then over the course of the years, it's amassed 400,000 views. It's taken me quite some time to finally acquire one of these for myself, but we're finally going to review the Nylon String Scalloped Fretboard Stratocaster with no pickups. I'm really excited for today's review and demo because this is the strangest beast that has ever been created. The Yngwie Signature Classical Stratocaster, but it looks like we've got some issue with our high E nylon string right away. Just in case you guys missed that last episode, this is a pickupless Stratocaster that only uses piezo saddles on here to give you an acoustic type tone. But being an Yngwie signature model, that means you also have to have a scalloped fretboard. If you don't know what a scalloped board is, it's what you're seeing right here. They take the fretboard and they just remove a little bit of material. That way you are only on the frets. That helps you play a little bit faster. You can do crazy vibratos on here. I've only ever had 2 other scalloped guitars in my life, and they're not necessarily for me, and the fact that you're mixing nylon strings with that's a little bit extra crazy. But then you have to realize this is essentially a flamenco style guitar with a whammy bar. Why do you even need that? It's so hilarious. I love it. But to make the specs even crazier, we get like a brass nut on here on top of it. But this was a limited edition run made in Japan around the year 1996-ish. I'm sure that does slightly vary, but this was known as the STCL-YM, which likely stands for Stratocaster Classical Yngwie Malmsteen. But if crazy scalloped frets aren't necessarily your thing, they also had the STCL-100. And those guys are pretty cool too. They don't even have a pick guard. And those were made around the exact same time. So if you needed one of these in your life, those were essentially your only options. A couple of really rare, very expensive guitars on the used market simply due to the, quirky nature of it. So a very popular musician named Ben Woods actually bought one of these and ended up reverse engineering it and created his own Nylocaster. Now he didn't like the volume control here, so he did away with that and was basically just converting squires. But unfortunately, we lost him a couple of months ago. That was very shocking news. Somebody left a comment on my video and I could not believe it. I enjoyed working with him on the video that we did together talking about his Nylocasters. I loved his playing style, so if nothing else, check out his YouTube channel. He left us a legacy of awesome hard metal songs converted into flamenco style playing, which I just completely love. So rest in peace, Ben Woods. My thoughts go out to his family, and I dedicate tonight's episode to Ben and his lasting legacy of awesome music. And if you're not familiar with Yngwie, he also likes playing neoclassical style music, so of course a signature like this would make complete sense. So we've already talked about this before. Now we need to get into the nitty-gritty of it. So let's go ahead, throw this thing on the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs. Alright, so this thing is ridiculously fun. It's nowhere near as impractical as I just thought this would be, having a scalloped fretboard and nylon strings and a tremolo system. But let's do this together here. What is underneath this pickguard? I've always been curious. Is it routed for anything? Oh my goodness, it is! To be honest, that kind of makes me sad. I was really hoping that there would be nothing in here, but that means if you wanted to modify this to actually have real pickups, you could. All you'd have to do is throw a different pickguard on it. But it's interesting to see the color difference. This was definitely on display somewhere where it caught a lot of sun, so I'm not sure if this is yellowed more or if it's faded, because what's underneath here is almost a slightly darker hue. But here we can see our pickup cavities. And here's our normal little route down here, but then you've got an extra little jut over here that you don't normally see on a Stratocaster. And that's just a little hole that goes to the 9-volt battery, would be my guess. So there you go. If you're ever taking apart an old made in Japan Stratocaster and you see this, you know it started life as one of these. But everything's looking stock here. I can confirm what everybody says on the internet. It is a Bartolini preamp called the Implant. Then we just have a standard 250K made in Japan pot. In the old video, some guy suggested maybe if you wanted a tone control on these, you could put a stacked pot, kind of like a push-pull, but when you pull up, it starts to affect your tone. I would say I wish this did have a tone knob, because then you could shape it a little bit better, but Ben always said he would just do all that with his pedal board and effects. But these are Graphtec saddles, and I'm hoping if we take off the bridge back cover, we'll be able to see some more of the wires and how that's all done up. The bridge here is just
pretty basic, with a screw-on style trem bar that has a very low profile. When you have it screwed all the way down, it actually touches the body. And as far as your output jack cavity, everything's looking pretty basic in here. And here's what our jack looks like. This guitar was just absolutely filthy. It didn't look too bad, but just touching it, your hands would smell, so I gave this a big, deep cleaning. And that's definitely apparent on our frets over here. I gave those an ultra polish and cleaned that fretboard up. But before we talk all about that, this is a basswood body according to spec sheets online. I didn't see it exposed anywhere, so I can't really confirm or deny, but it seems about right for a made in Japan. So let's check the specs on this. These are super jumbo frets. They're definitely nice and wide, nice and tall, and it contrasts very well with the whole scalloping of the fretboard. And as far as scallop jobs go, this is my first one that was like professionally done by a factory. These are honestly relatively shallow. They're not the craziest scallops in the world, but this angle really helps show you how they just basically carve away a little bit of your fretboard right there, so all you come in contact with are the frets. My favorite thing about that process on this is the maple wood grain gets a little bit wavy. Kind of looks cool. But on top of all this, it's still a lacquered fretboard, so it's incredibly comfortable to play. But the one bad thing about having a scalloped fretboard is if you have a heavy hand, you're even more so prone to bending all the notes out of tune. For example, on a normal guitar, you fret it, it sounds like this. But if you have a heavy hand, it bends it out of pitch. So imagine having all that room underneath it to allow you to bend it even more. That can be a problem for some people. You have to have a very light touch for scalloped boards. So naturally, I always thought that is going to be ridiculously bad with nylon strings, is it not? But the answer is no. Nylon strings are a little bit more resistant to that. I'm not saying that they don't bend out of pitch at all, but it's nowhere near as apparent as on steel strings. I was missing my top E string, right? So I thought, is there any reason why we cannot just put regular strings on this? And the answer is no. As far as I can tell, you could use regular strings on this. Because this is just a piezo saddle. You can use that on regular guitars too. But I would assume this preamp is like specially tuned for classical strings. I could be wrong on that, but we still have a truss rod in here. Because it's not like we're using a special pickup here. Like you can't put nylon strings on a regular electric guitar because it doesn't pick up the vibrations due to the material. But since we're not using a magnetic pickup, you don't have to worry about that. So I was all ready to say this is probably going to be an almost unplayable guitar for me, but no, it's great. I don't really even notice the scalloping job all that much. But all that said, this guitar isn't as easy to do big, crazy shredder bends on. But as far as the condition goes, there's only one tiny ding on our fretboard. Everything else is just looking great. Man, I just love the polished result of these frets. It looks so good, especially with the brass nut also shining. A spec sheet that I found online says it's a 10-inch fretboard radius, which I wasn't quite sure how to measure that on a scalloped board, but I guess it's really not that different, because even though it's a U shape, everywhere that you take it is technically level. And of course we have a 25.5-inch scale length. As far as neck specs, I measure 1.66 inches at the nut. That's important to know because this does not have a big wide classical guitar neck. Here's my actual classical, it's 2.1. It's like Gibson 2015 specs, that's why classical players love those guitars. But if you need to learn more about this guitar, check out the full review and demo. But then by the 12th fret, we're rocking 2.04. Kind of hard to take the first fret neck depth because of the scalloping, but it looks like it'd be about 0.87 and closest to 0.91 by the 12th. Here's that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret. Definitely C-shaped by the 12th, but you almost have a slight U-ish / deep C at the beginning. It's a nice comfortable profile. If you're an electric guitar player, that is. If you're used to playing classical guitars, I could see why Ben spec'd his out with the wider nut width. As far as our headstock, nothing too crazy going on here. Just a string tree, Fender Stratocaster decal, as well as an Yngwie signature decal. Vintage style tuners, poke it down, wrap it around type. And the brass nut is just such a nice touch. It's beautiful. Another weird spec. Moving on to the backside, let's see what's going on here with our battery pack. So it's the kind that you open here to replace it. But that's not necessarily anything too fancy. It's what we use in the modern day era yet. But here we can see inside the cavity. But again, still can't quite see the basswood. But there is a factory employee hair. Now this guitar's worth twice as much. But over here we can see the other side of that hole that we saw underneath the pickguard. But check this backplate out. It's such a cool banana color. Do you think they spec'd it that way? Well, looking at the back tells you no. It has just yellowed with age, and that's so beautiful. My first Stratocaster that we talked about in this episode has done a similar thing over the years. The knob on this guitar is kind of funny too, because half of it's a little bit lighter, then the other half has definitely aged a lot more. So it must have had sunlight coming from one direction, or maybe a shadow was cast over half of it. But anyways, back here, here's what we've got rocking. So it's looking just like a regular Stratocaster tremolo system, made of a non-magnetic material. But you're probably saying, hey Trogly, where's that fun part that you were talking about, the piezo saddles? It's right here. So they basically have this giant piece of black plastic screwed into the guitar, and then each individual saddle has wires coming from it. That's what these are. That's not the nylon strings. The nylon strings just go through here. And just in case you didn't know, yes, they do make ball end nylon strings. You don't have to tie these onto this system. But I would guess this big plastic block is here just to make sure that the wires don't get caught up in here when you're using your trem system, and then rip them out so individual saddles stop working. But after the polishing job, a lot of those black marks pretty well disappeared. I mean, this is not a very clean example. It's got some gashes, nicks, and dings back here. But since all the black smudging went away, I mean, that disappears at most lighting angles. I'm really glad I didn't let the cosmetic condition of this one scare me away, because the price was really good. This was only on Reverb for a couple of minutes. I picked it up for like $1,300, which was a steal. The only other one available at the time of recording was about $4,500. Now, granted, it's in mint condition, and after playing this thing, yeah, it's totally worth it. It's a lot of fun. But you have to be in the mindset of a Japanese Fender collector to really pay anywhere near that, which is something you can only understand if you really start to dive into all the interesting made in Japan models. Because Fender Japan has done a lot of fun stuff. Now looking at the back, you can see a seam line right there, and then there's another one right here, so we can tell it's a 3-piece body. Now unfortunately, we have a little bit of finish chipping right here in our neck pocket. You also have your typical neck pocket slight crack right there. You've got a slightly longer one on the other side, but these are all just in the finish. You can definitely tell that one's not in the wood, but it does detract a little bit from the appearance. There's technically a chip in the headstock up here, but that's just the poly lacquer. For me, it's all about the body. As long as you don't have a big chunk missing out of the finish, I'm all right. It's a 4 bolt-on construction. You got your F logo there. Your serial number is at the base of the heel. It says Made in Japan, serial number N048902. Then we do have a skunk stripe on this one. It's a maple neck. You definitely have some impressions back here. Looks like a slightly deeper one right there. A couple of light ones. Definitely by no means perfect. You got a ding right there. But I'm really happy with this guitar. Like, I'm not selling this. I don't keep many Fenders in my collection, but I'm having such a great time with this thing. I love it. And let's talk about this trem system. I mean, having classical strings with that just seems so crazy. But you got to remember, classical strings have such an elasticity to them as compared to what we're used to with steel wound strings. Honestly, bending them a little bit is not as insane as even stretching the strings. So I guess, you know, it kind of makes sense. It does come back in tune just about as good as any other trem system. And if anything, I would say nylon strings actually perform very well under those circumstances because they are a little bit bendy. But word of warning, it takes forever to tune these things. I'm used to micro adjustments, but these you gotta keep turning and turning and turning to get to where they need to be. So as far as this playing demo, since this is a brand new E string, I don't have a lot of hope for that because it takes a couple of days, sometimes even a week for nylon strings to really settle in. But since these were put on about 6 months ago when I first bought the guitar, most of it should be in tune. But I think it's time to share some more fun with you guys of how it sounds. But first, the weight, 6 pounds, 11 ounces. Let's go ahead and get into it.
As you can see, you can have a lot of fun with this thing. Bends though, not really too much. Now, usually scalloped fretboards, they don't actually scallop everything. That's kind of an Yngwie thing. Most people tend to just scallop like maybe the top 12 frets or even just sections of the top end. But no, this one's just a little bit crazy. But I think it sounds pretty good in tune. For chords, I mean, compared to a regular completely scalloped board. Now the tremolo is kind of loud because it's right by your pickups. And being nylon strings, you can't really get a whole dive bomb effect, but it's good if you need a little bit of a warble. Although I don't see myself using the trem too often. And of course, this video wouldn't be complete if I didn't just play it unplugged. How loud is this thing? It's about just as loud as a normal electric guitar, as compared to traditional here. So don't buy this thinking you can gig with it and amplify it just using a mic or something. It's still an electric guitar. Now let me know all about Yngwie's signature classical Stratocaster. What are my final thoughts on this? I am so happy I tried this out in person because I thought this thing was going to be like almost unplayable with the scalloped fretboard and the nylon strings, but now I know, and you do too. You don't have to be scared of this scalloped board, that's for sure, because the nylon strings work surprisingly well with it. Now, as far as plugging it in and the recorded tones, yeah, using a pick was a little bit extreme. I did find that I definitely prefer this somewhere around 8 on the volume, but most of the demo, unfortunately, I forgot to turn it down. So you can make it sound better and not quite as aggressive, but that's why I really wish this had some sort of a tone control so you could kind of dial that down a bit too. But I had a lot of fun checking this thing out. It's every bit as cool and fun as I thought it was going to be when I made that Rock or Not episode. So if you happen to see one of these out in the wild, go ahead and try it. You might just like it. For me, is this one going to be for sale? No, it's just that fun and good. I'm going to hold this back in my personal collection because it's just so unique and quirky. I hope Fender makes more weird things like this because I think a lot more people would like it, but I've always been enamored with classical guitar playing. I know I mainly play rock music, but I would love to become an accomplished classical guitarist as well because it just sounds so good. I love the sound of nylon strings. But anyways, troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode, seeing it in the flesh, finally, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day, and you might even enjoy this next one.